YouTube, welcome back to Wtf Rc Cars. So, something a bit interesting for the MB4 users out there. So you've probably all got some kind of setup like this, where you've got your receiver and you have to take the receiver cover off to get to the bind plug or firmware updating plug. So, let's get rid of that for a minute. Now what you're going to need for this to work is the receiver lid or receiver box lid, one of these little switches, and these come with the waterproof cap, and then you've got one nut that goes on the outside, and then you've got a sort of a lock spring washer, and then another little spacer, and then another nut on the bottom. So we're going to need one of these, and this is a basically off in the off position, on connects them two, on the other way connects them two. So I believe with it. So what we're going to want to do is create a cable that goes from negative to whichever pin we need to short at to do the firmware update or the bind. Then you're going to get your receiver box, and you need to pay attention to where your receiver sits underneath this to see where you've got the most room, and then just position the switch. Now the reason I picked these is because they are quite small and they're still quite stiff, so it shouldn't vibrate and get knocked on or off when the car's running. But basically you're going to have to work out where the biggest amount of space is, and then we're going to have to put that in. Then you're going to need some servo wire, you're going to need a couple of these little servo plugs, and then we've got a whole bunch of these little pins. So we're going to make our own lead up. Now you only actually need 3 wires, so it's going to be, you're not really going to need much servo cable, because the only distance that we've got to go is from somewhere just inside here to 2 separate plugs on receiver. So we're not going to need a lot, and I think the distance what I'm going to go for with that, probably going to start with that. So that's all we need. Let's have a look, what have we got to cut this way? That'll do. So first thing we're going to want to do is separate these into 3 separate cables, make them easier to work on. It's not the easiest thing to do this. But if you just work at them, you can pretty easily strip them down a bit. Now what we're going to need is 2 wires into one of them and 1 into the other. So depending on what your receiver is, depends on how far apart these are going to need to be, or where the actual plugs are plugged in on yours. And then the other end, we're going to want to strip these, but these don't need to be stripped as much. So you're just going to want to separate them a bit, and then what we're going to do is solder them to the 3 pins on the actual plug itself. That'll get the switch side sorted. So your 3 wires, and basically it really doesn't matter what order you put these in, that just dictates what order these go into the pins on the actual plugs at the other side. So sure, you've all seen me solder a million times on all the plugs, so I'll get this end soldered on, and I'll get the little ends, they just literally line up, and then you fold the little tags in. So I'm going to get the wires soldered onto the switch, and I'm going to get the plug ends fitted, and then I'll come back and show you where we go from there. Right, so what you're aiming for is something along these lines. So black wire to one side, white to other, red in middle. And then if you look at your little plugs, what we're wanting to do on the receiver, this is the bind one, so you're going to connect ground to the signal on bind, and that's going to do it when you switch the switch to connect red and black together. When it's in the center, it won't connect any together, and then when you flick it over to the other direction, it's going to join the signal from the bind to the signal on channel 3. So this is going to be your signal to ground for your bind, and then when we flick the switch, it's going signal to signal on channel 3 between the bind port to put it into update mode. So let's get the hole drilled in the top and we'll get the switch mounted. Right, so that's a switch mounted in as receiver cover. It just sticks past bottom, and on this receiver box the receiver's sat quite low, so it's not going to affect it. And then we've got the forward and back position. So what we need to do now is get it connected to the receiver, and then we'll be able to fire this up. So I'll get them plugged in. You're going to want the one with 2 wires on your bind and the one with 1 on channel 3. Right, so we've got everything in position. So if we don't flick the switch at all and it's just in the central point, turn it on and should be able to see right about here. So we've got the receiver light steady, one flash, one off, just to say it's looking for its transmitter. Then if we put the switch in the other position and then power it up, and you can see it's doing the 3 flash. So we've got it in the mode for binding or update, can't remember which 3 flash is. But if we turn it off, flick the switch across, turn it back on, and then we've got the fast flashing mode. So that's either update or bind. I think fast flashing's, whichever. But basically, just by flicking the switch, we can now switch between normal operation, update or bind mode. So let's get this neatly put back together and then we're done. Basically all you want to do is just make sure your wire isn't going to get caught, and drop the top of the receiver box down, and you'll feel it when it goes into position. If I can remember which size screws these are. Just get one of them in there, so just give you some idea of what it's going to look like. And we've got the servo at this one because I'm doing servo tests on it. But basically, if I can clear all the sensors and whatnot that way, let's get the batteries off as well. These connectors are always really stiff on this. Right. And basically, that's how it looks when it's on. So you've got a nice tidy little switch, and you can switch between update, normal or bind without having to take your receiver box off. So the links will be in the description for the servo wire and the Futaba plugs that I've used for the servo end, and the little metal connectors as well, and the switches. But thanks again for watching Wtf Rc Cars. If you like this kind of video and find it useful, don't forget to like and subscribe, share to friends and family or anybody else that might like it, and I'll catch you guys again in the next one.